Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock on Steve Harvey's show. One question changed everything. The studio lights glowed warmly, and the crowd clapped with energy as Steve Harvey stepped onto the stage with his familiar smile. The set was alive, filled with laughter and the buzzing excitement of a live audience. But behind the curtains, in the quiet moment before the show began, Keanu Reeves sat silently, his eyes lowered, his hands resting calmly in his lap. Beside him, Sandra Bullock shifted in her chair, her heart beating faster than she expected. They had both been on countless shows before, but this one felt different. The producers had teased that Steve had a special question that would test not only their friendship, but their hearts. The cameras rolled. Applause filled the air. Steve welcomed the audience with his usual mix of humor and charm. Then he turned toward the side of the stage and called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome two Hollywood legends, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock." The crowd exploded with cheers. Keanu walked out first, his modest smile lighting up the room, followed by Sandra, who radiated warmth and elegance. They hugged gently in the center of the stage, and the audience melted, sensing the quiet bond they shared. The first minutes of the show were lighthearted. Steve joked about their movies, teased Keanu about his calm voice, and complimented Sandra's effortless wit. The laughter came easily. But underneath the surface, both Keanu and Sandra felt a strange tension. Maybe it was the weight of their history. Maybe it was the way the crowd reacted to their chemistry. Or maybe it was the mystery of Steve's promised question. After some playful banter, Steve leaned forward, his tone shifting. "Now listen," he said, his voice carrying a mix of humor and seriousness. "People out there have always wondered about you two. You've worked together, you've been friends for years, and folks say the connection is something special. So I have just one question for you, and I want both of you to answer honestly. If there was one moment in your life that you regret not speaking your heart, what was it and who was it with?" The audience went silent. Even the air in the room seemed to pause. Sandra's smile froze, her eyes flickering nervously toward Keanu. Keanu's calm face didn't change much, but inside his chest tightened. Steve's words dug into old memories, unspoken feelings, and choices that shaped who they were. Keanu took a breath, and in that breath was years of patience, kindness, and quiet pain. He thought of nights when he wanted to call her, times when he wanted to say more than just "you're wonderful." He thought of the days when fame, schedules, and fear of ruining something precious stopped him. The audience leaned in closer as if they could sense something important was about to unfold. Before he could answer, Sandra spoke softly, her voice trembling. "There was a time," she said, "when I felt something deeper than friendship. But I was scared. I didn't want to risk what we already had, so I stayed quiet." The crowd gasped lightly, and Steve raised his eyebrows. Keanu turned to her slowly, his eyes filled with quiet surprise. The honesty in her voice shook him. He had never heard her admit it so openly. Steve looked at Keanu. "Your turn, brother. You holding back on us?" Keanu hesitated, his hands clasped together. Then, with the same humility that defined him, he spoke. "I have lived most of my life trying to be careful with people I care about. I never wanted to cause pain, but yes, there was a time I wished I said something too. Maybe my life would have been different, maybe not. But I know I never wanted to lose her as a friend." The words were gentle, but the weight behind them was undeniable. The audience clapped softly, sensing the vulnerability in his voice. The silence between them after that was louder than any applause. Sandra blinked rapidly, fighting tears she didn't expect. Keanu's gaze lingered on her, steady and kind, but with a depth that told a story only they knew. The cameras captured it all, and the viewers at home could feel that something more than entertainment was happening. Steve leaned back, his playful smile returning, but his eyes betrayed that he too felt the gravity of what had been revealed. "Well, folks," he said, "sometimes the hardest thing in life is saying what's in your heart. But let me tell you, this right here, this is real." The audience clapped again, but their cheers were softer this time, touched with emotion. For the rest of the show, the tone shifted. There were still jokes, still laughter, but underneath every word, the tension remained. Keanu and Sandra shared glances that carried years of memories, and the audience could not look away. They were watching two people who had lived, loved, and lost, but who still respected each other enough to stand side by side. When the show ended, the applause was long and heartfelt. Steve hugged them both and whispered something encouraging. They smiled for the cameras one last time, but as they walked off stage, the air between them was thick with everything they had just admitted. There was relief, but also questions. What now? Had too much time passed? Or had something been reborn right there under the bright studio lights? Keanu walked beside Sandra in silence as the studio crew rushed around them. She glanced at him once, searching his face, and he met her eyes with the same steady calm. No words were spoken, but in that silence, both of them knew that a door had been opened. Whether they stepped through it together or let it close again, only time would tell. After the show, questions in the silence. The night after the show, Keanu sat in his hotel room with the city lights glowing outside the window. The applause of the audience still echoed faintly in his ears. But it was not the clapping he remembered most. It was the look in Sandra's eyes when she admitted the truth she had held for years. Those words replayed in his mind again and again, and he wondered if the silence he had kept for so long had cost him something he could never get back. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues who had seen the episode already. Everyone said the same thing. That moment was powerful. You and Sandra looked like you were meant for each other. Keanu smiled softly at the texts but did not answer. He was not interested in gossip. He was interested only in the way her voice trembled when she said she once felt more than friendship. Sandra, on the other side of the city, sat curled on her couch with a blanket around her shoulders. She had not planned to speak so openly. The question from Steve had broken down walls she thought were unshakable. Now she wondered what Keanu truly felt. Had he said his words only for the cameras, or had he revealed something deeper? The thought kept her awake, her heart restless. By morning, the internet was buzzing. Headlines covered entertainment sites. Keanu and Sandra confess hidden feelings on live show. Social media flooded with clips of the silent stare they shared after their answers. People called it the most real moment ever seen on TV. Some fans cheered for them to finally come together, while others speculated if it was all for publicity. Keanu ignored the noise, but Sandra felt the weight of it pressing on her chest. Later that week, Sandra sent a short text to Keanu. "Can we talk?" It was simple, but her hand shook as she pressed send. She half expected him to ignore it. Instead, within minutes, his reply appeared. "Yes. Name the time and place." Her heart skipped at his calm, steady answer. She chose a quiet cafe away from cameras. Somewhere they had gone once many years ago when they were just co-stars laughing over coffee. The meeting day arrived. Sandra reached the cafe first, her eyes hidden under sunglasses, her heart pounding. Every sound, the clinking cups, the hum of conversation, felt distant as she waited. When Keanu walked in, his presence filled the room without effort. He smiled gently, removed his jacket, and sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other as if words were too heavy to carry. Finally, Sandra whispered, "I don't know why I said it on the show. I wasn't planning to. It just came out." Her eyes lowered, unsure if she should feel embarrassed. Keanu leaned forward, his voice soft. Maybe it needed to come out. Maybe it was time. There was no judgment in his tone, only kindness. But his words carried a quiet truth that struck her heart. They spoke for hours. They remembered old days on movie sets, the long nights of shooting, the laughter between scenes, and the way people always commented on their natural bond. Then they talked about life apart, her struggles, his losses, their separate paths. At times they fell into silence, but even the silence felt meaningful, as if every pause was its own conversation. But beneath the laughter and the memories, an unspoken tension grew. Sandra finally asked the question that had lived in her chest since that night. "Keanu, if we both felt something back then, why didn't we ever say it? Why didn't we try?" Her voice cracked slightly, her vulnerability raw. Keanu's eyes softened, but there was pain in them too. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "I thought if I spoke, I could ruin the one thing I valued most, your friendship. I couldn't risk losing you, Sandra." His words hung heavy between them. Sandra blinked back tears. "And maybe I thought the same. I didn't want to lose you either." They sat in silence again, both realizing how much fear had stolen from them. Years had passed, opportunities missed. Yet here they were, still sitting across from each other, still connected in a way that time could not erase. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. The cafe grew quieter as customers left. Keanu glanced at Sandra, then spoke with a quiet strength. "The question is, what do we do now? We cannot change the past, but maybe we can decide what the present means." Sandra looked at him, her eyes shining with uncertainty and hope. She didn't have an answer, not yet, but deep inside, she knew the story between them was not finished. Maybe after all these years it was only beginning. The weight of choice. The days after their meeting at the cafe felt strangely quiet for both Keanu and Sandra. The world outside buzzed with endless gossip. Yet inside, their hearts carried a silence heavier than the noise. They had spoken truths that could no longer be hidden, and now they stood at a crossroad. Either they moved forward into something new, or they stepped back into the safe distance they had always kept. Both choices carried risk, both carried fear, and both carried the shadow of regret. Keanu spent his mornings walking alone through the streets of the city. He thought about how life had tested him over the years, how loss had shaped him, and how he had always chosen humility over attention. But now, with Sandra's words still echoing, he wondered if kindness sometimes meant taking a risk for happiness. He had always respected her enough to stay silent, but maybe, just maybe, respect now meant giving her the honesty she deserved. Sandra, on the other hand, wrestled with emotions she had long buried. She had lived through heartbreak, through failed promises, through the lonely nights that fame could not hide. And yet, there was something different about Keanu. He was not like the others. He had never chased her, never demanded, never taken more than she offered. He simply gave patience, friendship, understanding. That was why her confession on the show had shocked even herself. It was as if her heart, tired of silence, had finally broken free. Then came an unexpected twist. A major magazine published an article claiming that their moment on Steve Harvey's show had been staged for publicity. The story spread quickly, painting them as actors playing with fans' emotions. Keanu read the article in his quiet apartment and felt a deep sadness. Not for himself, but for Sandra. She had been brave enough to reveal a piece of her heart, and now strangers mocked it as fake. The thought of her hurting because of it stirred something protective inside him. He called her that night. When she answered, her voice sounded heavy as if she had been crying. "I'm sorry," she said before he could even speak. "I shouldn't have said anything on the show. Look what it's turned into." Keanu's voice was steady, gentle, but firm. "Don't apologize for being honest. People will always say things. What matters is what's true between us." His words brought her comfort, though doubt still lingered. She wanted to believe him, but fear whispered that maybe it was already too late for them. A week later, they were invited to appear together at a charity gala. Sandra hesitated, but Keanu agreed without question, knowing it might give her strength to face the noise. The night of the gala, cameras flashed as they arrived side by side. Whispers filled the hall. Eyes followed them everywhere. Sandra felt the pressure, but when Keanu gently placed his hand on her back as they walked, she felt a calm she had not known in years. It wasn't a performance, it was him, simply being who he always was. During the event, a reporter boldly asked in front of the crowd, "So, are you two finally admitting you're more than friends?" The question cut through the music and chatter. Sandra froze, her cheeks warm, unsure what to say. Keanu, however, looked directly at the reporter and answered in his calm tone, "We are two people who have always cared for each other deeply. Labels don't matter as much as honesty does." The crowd murmured, some disappointed by the lack of a dramatic answer, others touched by the sincerity. Sandra glanced at him with a soft smile, grateful for his steadiness. Later that evening, away from the crowd, they found themselves on a balcony overlooking the city lights. The night air was cool, carrying with it the sound of laughter from inside. Sandra leaned on the railing, her thoughts heavy. "Keanu," she whispered, "what if we're too late? What if we missed our chance years ago?" Keanu stood beside her, his gaze on the stars. "Then we take the chance that is here now," he replied. "Life doesn't give us yesterday again. It only gives us today." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe the world would continue to talk. Maybe critics would never believe them. But in that quiet balcony moment, all that mattered was the truth between them. She turned to him, her voice barely audible. "Then maybe today is enough." Keanu's gentle smile reached his eyes, and in that smile was the beginning of something new. Not a script, not a performance, but a story they had both written silently for years, now finally finding its words. The storm after the calm, the morning after the gala, the world woke up to flashing headlines. Photos of Keanu and Sandra on the balcony, their faces close in quiet conversation, spread across every news site and social media page. The captions shouted questions: are they finally together? Is this Hollywood's secret love story? For fans, it was romantic. For critics, it was just another scandal. But for Keanu and Sandra, it was neither. It was simply a private moment stolen by cameras turned into a public storm. Sandra sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through endless articles. Some praised them. Others accused them of creating drama for attention. She felt torn open, her privacy once again taken away. She thought about calling Keanu, but stopped herself. She wanted to be strong, to not lean on him for every wave of trouble. Yet deep down she longed for his voice, for the calmness he always carried. Keanu, on the other side of the city, read none of it. He avoided the gossip, choosing instead to focus on what mattered. But when his phone buzzed with a message from an old friend saying, "Protect her, she looks tired in those photos," his chest tightened. He knew Sandra was hurting. He had seen it in her eyes when the reporter had cornered them, and he knew the weight of judgment was heavier on her than on him. Hollywood often forgave men but tore women apart with sharper teeth. That evening, Keanu knocked on Sandra's door. When she opened it, surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by relief. She stepped aside, letting him in. Her house was quiet. Too quiet, as if even the walls carried the heaviness of her heart. She tried to smile, but her eyes gave her away. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "The cameras will follow." Keanu shook his head. "Let them. I'm not here for them. I'm here for you." They sat together in her living room, the silence between them filled with unspoken words. Finally, Sandra broke it. "I don't know if I can keep living under this spotlight. Every time I open myself even a little, it becomes a circus. I regret saying those words on the show." Her voice cracked, trembling with frustration. Keanu leaned forward, his tone steady. "Don't regret honesty. Honesty is the only thing that's real in this world of noise." His words made her eyes fill with tears. "But honesty hurts too," she whispered. Keanu's gaze softened. "Sometimes it hurts, yes, but silence hurts more. Silence is what kept us apart for years." The truth of his words cut deep, and she nodded, her tears slipping free. He reached out, gently holding her hand, his touch quiet but grounding. In that moment, she felt her storm ease, if only slightly. For a while, they just sat like that, hands intertwined, saying nothing. The outside world roared with rumors, but inside those walls there was only the truth of two souls finding courage to stand together. Sandra leaned against his shoulder, and for the first time in days, she felt safe. She whispered, "Do you ever wish we had tried sooner?" Keanu answered without hesitation, "Every day, but wishing doesn't change the past. It only reminds us to not waste today." As the night deepened, Sandra realized something. The fear of the world, the judgment, the gossip, it would never end. But the presence of Keanu, his kindness, his steady strength, that was real. And maybe real was worth fighting for. She lifted her head, looking into his eyes, and spoke with a trembling voice. "Then maybe today is where we begin." Keanu held her gaze, his quiet smile carrying both sadness and hope. "Then let us begin," he whispered back. Outside, the city lights flickered, the storm of headlines still raging. But inside, a new story was being written. Not by cameras, not by critics, but by two people who had finally found the courage to face the truth together. Shadows from the past, the days after their quiet decision to begin, were filled with a strange mix of peace and uncertainty. Keanu and Sandra spoke more often now, not as co-stars or even as friends, but as two people who were slowly allowing their hearts to breathe. Yet every time they found a quiet moment together, the world seemed determined to remind them that their lives were not private. New articles appeared daily, dissecting every glance, every smile, every silence between them. The storm had not passed, it was only shifting shape. One evening, Sandra invited Keanu to her home again. She prepared a simple dinner, nothing extravagant, just pasta and salad, because she wanted the night to feel normal. As they ate, laughter returned, light and easy, reminding them of old times. But halfway through the meal, Sandra grew quiet. Keanu noticed and asked softly, "What is it?" She looked down at her plate, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if this doesn't work? What if the world breaks us before we even have the chance?" Keanu set his fork down and leaned closer. "The world doesn't decide for us. We do." His words were steady, but inside he too carried fear. He knew how fragile happiness could be, how easily it could slip away. But he also knew that regret was heavier than risk, and he was tired of carrying regret. Just as the moment grew tender, the past came knocking. A message appeared on Sandra's phone, and when she read it, her face paled. It was from an old acquaintance, someone who knew details about her personal life, things she had kept hidden for years. The message warned her that secrets might be revealed to the press if she continued to be seen with Keanu. Her hands trembled as she showed the screen to him. "I can't go through this again," she whispered. "I've fought so hard to keep my children, my family, my past safe." Keanu took the phone, read the words, and placed it gently on the table. His expression was calm, but his voice carried quiet steel. "Sandra, no one has the right to use your past against you. You are more than what people think they know." She shook her head, tears forming. "But if this goes public, it won't just hurt me, it will hurt everyone I love." Her fear was raw, and Keanu felt it deeply. He knew her heart had always carried not only her own pain, but also the weight of protecting others. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and unbroken. Then Keanu reached across the table and held her hands firmly. "Listen to me," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "You don't have to face this alone. If they come after you, they come after me too. And I will not let them destroy you." His voice was not loud, but it carried a strength that wrapped around her like armor. Sandra's tears fell freely now, not just from fear but from the unexpected comfort of his words. For so long she had fought her battles alone. Hearing someone say they would stand beside her, it shook something deep inside. "Why are you always so kind?" she whispered through her tears. Keanu's smile was faint, almost sad. "Because the world has enough cruelty. I choose kindness." That night, as the city outside moved on with its noise and lights, Sandra felt something shift. The shadows of her past were still there, threatening to rise, but for the first time she did not feel powerless. Keanu's presence reminded her that resilience was not about standing alone. It was about allowing someone else to share the burden. Before he left, they stood at her doorway in silence. She looked at him, her voice quiet but steady. "Whatever comes next, don't let go, Keanu." He met her eyes with the same calm strength. "I won't." And as the door closed behind him, both of them knew the storm was far from over. But now, they were not walking into it alone. The answer that changed everything. The storm finally broke when the magazine released a front-page article about Sandra's past. Details about her private struggles, her mistakes, even the years when she felt lost, were printed in bold letters for the world to read. Cameras surrounded her house. Reporters shouted questions and social media buzzed like wildfire. For many, it was gossip. For Sandra, it was a knife reopening old wounds she had fought so hard to heal. She stayed inside for 2 days, curtains closed, barely eating. Her phone buzzed nonstop, but she ignored it, except for Keanu's quiet messages. Every morning he sent the same words, "I'm here." No long speeches, no pressure, just those 2 words. By the 3rd day, she finally called him. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "They've taken everything from me." Keanu's answer came soft but steady. "No, Sandra. They can only take what you give them. Your dignity, your truth, that belongs to you." Later that night, Keanu came to her home again. He found her sitting in silence, her eyes swollen from tears. He sat beside her, not speaking at first, simply being there. After a while, she leaned against him, whispering, "I don't know how to stand anymore." His arm wrapped around her, firm and gentle. "Then lean on me until you can. That's what people do when they care." But the story took an unexpected turn. The public, instead of mocking Sandra, began to defend her. Fans flooded social media with messages of support. They called her strong, brave human. Women shared their own stories of pain and mistakes, saying Sandra's past made them love her more, not less. The tide shifted. What was meant to break her ended up showing the world her resilience. And through it all, Keanu stayed by her side, a quiet constant. A week later, they were invited back to Steve Harvey's show. This time not to promote a film, but to talk about what had happened. Sandra hesitated, afraid of opening herself up again. But Keanu encouraged her gently. Sometimes the only way to silence lies is to speak the truth yourself. So she agreed. The stage lights were just as bright as before, the audience just as loud. But this time Sandra's heart beat differently. She was nervous, yes, but she also felt stronger. Steve welcomed them warmly, then asked the question everyone wanted to know. "After all this, where do you two stand now?" The audience leaned forward, holding their breath. Sandra looked at Keanu, her eyes searching. Keanu met her gaze, calm and steady as always, then spoke. "I have spent years keeping quiet because I was afraid. But silence has cost us too much already. So today I will say what I should have said long ago." He paused, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Sandra, I love you. I always have. And I don't care what the world says, because what matters is what we know to be true." The audience gasped, then erupted into cheers. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she tried to find words. Finally, she whispered into the microphone, her voice raw and honest. "I love you too. I think I always did. I was just too afraid to believe it could be real." The crowd stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even crying. Steve Harvey shook his head with a big smile. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes life gives you second chances, and you just saw one happen right here." After the show, when the cameras were gone, Keanu and Sandra stood together backstage. She held his hand tightly, whispering, "Are we really doing this?" Keanu's smile was gentle. Yes, no more hiding. No more silence. And for the first time in years, Sandra felt light, as if the heavy chains she had carried were finally breaking away. In the weeks that followed, their lives did not suddenly become perfect. There were still rumors, still critics, still challenges, but through every storm they faced it side by side. Fans began calling their story The Love That Waited, not because it was flawless, but because it showed that respect, humility, and kindness could outlast fear. One evening, long after the headlines had faded, Sandra and Keanu sat quietly on her porch watching the sunset. No cameras, no audience, just two souls who had walked through fire and still chosen each other. Sandra leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for not letting go." Keanu kissed her forehead softly and replied, "Thank you for finally holding on." And with that, the love they had once left unspoken finally became the love they lived.